Well, it's a long story, so sit back as we take you back to when the United Nations gave its partition plan recommendation in 1947. Israel was said to be given 56% of the land west of the Jordan River, which was mostly desert, to leave room for incoming immigrants. The local Arab populations were to receive some 43%, which included a third of the Mediterranean coastline and nearly all of the highlands in Judea and Samaria. Jerusalem, meanwhile, was said to be an international city. The Jews agreed to the plan, but the Arab world not only said no, they launched a war intent on eliminating all Jewish presence in the region, which completely voided the UN partition recommendation. Now, fighting between the Jews and Arabs in British Mandatory Palestine continued until the British mandate expired in 1948, at which time Israel took the opportunity to declare its independence. Now, that's when 5 surrounding Arab armies invaded. The result of this war leaving the map looking like this, with Jordan controlling nearly all of what's today known as the West Bank, as it lies west of the Jordan River. Jordan also expelled all the Jews in the area. Egypt, meanwhile, took control over Gaza. Jerusalem was left divided into eastern and western halves along the lines where Israel stopped Jordan's military advance. Israel got everything in between, offering citizenship to all the Arabs who remained. Those who accepted it are today the Arab Israelis, making up over 20% of Israel's population. As for those who refused citizenship, the offer to them and their descendants still stands today.
But I'm going to jump in here because the thing is that this quote-unquote border, which we know now as the Green Line, was just a ceasefire line. At the Arabs' insistence, it would not serve as a true and permanent border, leaving the territories essentially in dispute. Now fast forward to the 1967 Six-Day War. Israel preemptively strikes Egypt, acting on intelligence of an imminent threat, as well as Egyptian acts of war in the Straits of Tiran. Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and even Iraq got involved in the war. The result saw Israeli territory expand across the rest of Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. Finally, to complicate things further as to who has rights to where, in 1988, Jordan officially gave up its claims to the West Bank and stripped all of the Palestinian Arabs of Jordanian citizenship.
Now, bear with us as we fast forward again to the 1990s and the signing of the Oslo Accords, an attempt by Israel under the leadership of Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres to broker peace with the Palestinians under Yasser Arafat's leadership. This process created the Palestinian Authority and a framework for peace, but it collapsed and evolved into an approximately 5-year surge of devastating terror attacks against Israelis known as the Second Intifada. Yet even within that period, there were renewed attempts at peace. The first, made by Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, which the Palestinians rejected. Then attempt B by Premier Ariel Sharon came in 2005, where Sharon unilaterally pulled all Jewish settlements out of Gaza, leading to the violent Hamas takeover in 2007.
Next, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert tried his hand in 2008-2009, but again, none of those offers were agreed to by the Palestinians. And finally, under Netanyahu in 2013-14, peace talks broke down again after Palestinian refusals to accept. Now, many critics are pointing to Israel's inflexibility on settlements in the Judea-Samaria region at the time, although the Palestinians by then had a long history of rejecting negotiations for other reasons.
A good question, and basically the answer amounts to timing. With the release of US President Donald Trump's Peace to Prosperity plan in January this year, Israel was given a clear path to extending sovereignty over Israeli settlements across roughly 30% of Judea and Samaria. The thing is, President Trump is up for re-election this November. And if he doesn't win a second term in office, it's feared that support for this plan would disappear with his administration. So as they say, strike while the iron is hot.
In short, it's complicated. Some of those in favor argue that Israel has every right to follow through on the Jews' historic, religious, and indigenous claims to the land. Here on ILTV, Israel's major media watchdog Honest Reporting told us that some think that for the first time it causes the Palestinians to pay a price for not closing on a peace deal, and it pressures them to come and negotiate. The thinking here is that every time the Palestinians have said no to a deal, Israel comes back with a better offer, in essence, rewarding the PA's rejectionism. So now Israel is trying to force their hand.
And as we saw in his Washington Post op-ed, Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, said the move squashes the illusion that the Palestinians will be able to eradicate Israel in the future. Also, if you look at the current map, you'll see Jewish areas speckled amongst the Palestinian areas. Israelis who live there would like to see the Jewish areas joined, for safety reasons and also to prevent their homes being absorbed in a future Palestinian state, the creation of which some in Israel's right wing take issue with in its entirety. But even among those who want to see annexations, some don't want to see it done in the way that Trump's plan envisions.
Some say it would leave Israeli islands in Palestinian territory. Some argue that the security challenges would be too great and costly, and some say that it's just purely political pandering aimed at the Israeli right wing, and that it's not worth the cost in international and diplomatic penalties that may result.
So that same old saying again, 9 million people, 9 billion opinions. And then there's the Israeli left, who oppose the move entirely, arguing that it would indefinitely extend Israel's occupation of the Palestinian people, and that the Palestinians would be left without a real path to self-determination. Now that word occupation, by the way, is disputed by Israelis who feel you can't occupy what is rightfully yours. But the term is used by Israel's Supreme Court in determining how Israel must behave in those areas.
As for Prime Minister Netanyahu, in principle, he's expressed support for annexations from the beginning. But recently, his more centrist coalition partner, Benny Gantz, has also come to the conclusion that if the Palestinians aren't going to talk and haven't agreed to any deal to date, Israel has to push forward alone. Well, the Palestinians and many in the international community saying no. The PA even goes so far as to accuse Israeli settlers of war crimes at the International Criminal Court for building in Judea and Samaria. And it's true that some annexations, like the unilateral taking of another country's sovereign land, is forbidden by international law. But the land in question is exactly that, in question. It's disputed territory that, under the Oslo Accords signed by the Palestinian leadership, would likely go to Israel anyway. So from the Israeli government's point of view, it's time to get the ball rolling.
So technically, yes, extending sovereignty is annexation, but that doesn't make it illegal, immoral, or evil by definition. There are three kinds of annexations. The first is unilateral annexations of sovereign land, like what Russia did in Crimea, and that is illegal under international law. The second is bilateral annexations of sovereign land, meaning that both sides agree to it, like what the US did with Texas and Hawaii, and this is perfectly fine. Finally, the third kind is unilateral annexations of land not officially controlled by any sovereign state, like what happened in the Cook Islands in 1900. And that's what Israel is planning to do in parts of the disputed West Bank region.
Now this is the big question, and there are a number of different hypotheses. Here's the current map of the West Bank divided into areas A, B, and C.
Area A is under the control of the Palestinian Authority as well as Palestinian security. Area B is where the Palestinian Authority presides over civil matters, but there's joined Israeli and Palestinian security efforts. And finally, Area C is where Israel is in charge of both security and civilian matters, as well as infrastructure.
So now one misconception is that Israel is trying to annex the whole West Bank, therefore standing in the way of a potential future Palestinian state. But the population in areas Israel is looking to annex is already made up of an Israeli majority, and it's suspected they'll all be in Area C under Israeli jurisdiction. But the maps haven't come out yet. Plus, in Trump's deal, Israel gets just a fraction of what it expected to get under the Oslo Accords, which the Palestinians signed.
So, practically speaking, under the Trump outline, not much would actually change on the ground, except that some Palestinian communities could find themselves absorbed by Israel. And reports tell us that quietly, some of those residents would actually be happy about this move, because they hope to gain Israeli citizenship. Also, as we said before, it changes the negotiating position, putting the ball in the Palestinian Authority's court to come to the table. So 72 years after the establishment of the state, we're looking at another shift in the narrative. July 1 will tell us in what direction it's beginning to head.